shower thunderstorm by Friday afternoon, the high 77. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
It is 70 at O'Hare. Next news at 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Make sure to check out the Income Store live video stream of today's show right now at 560theanswer.com.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, and we've talked about this issue before, but it bears continuing conversation given the incredible impact that it's having on families across America, across every demographic. I'm talking about the opioid crisis, of course, responsible for more opioid overdoses, responsible for more deaths than car accidents, than death by gun in America in recent years. And Dr. Sally Satel, who's a practicing psychiatrist and also a lecturer at Yale University School of Medicine, has a new docuseries, Faces of Policy, the Opioid Crisis, that I came upon over at the American Enterprise Institute's website, aei.org, and thought, why don't we have a professional in the space on to talk about the opioid crisis, the roots of it, and how it's metastasized, and what families should be looking out for, and how you can attack it if a member of your family succumbs to addiction. So without further ado, Sally Satel, Dr. Sally Satel, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
So the first installment in your series about the opioid crisis is the roots of addiction, as I sort of alluded to. And I guess why don't we just start there, start at the beginning, the roots of it. We've seen a lot of documentaries about aspects of it. Where should our focus be with respect to the roots?
Yeah, our series is 3 videos, and they're short. They're about 10 minutes long. And as you say, the first one goes to the roots of addiction. And we approach it, and since it's called Faces of Policy, we approach this very much at the human level. And, one of the points we wanted to get across was that, we often talk about addiction almost as in terms that are too medicalized. In other words, sometimes you can read an article and it almost seems as if someone's been exposed to a painkiller and they somehow caught addiction. But it doesn't work that way at all. People who are drawn to drugs and use them to the point where they injure their lives and their families are usually compelled, by very profound personal and emotional reasons. Again, we've tend to talk about addiction lately as a brain disease, and of course the brain is involved. There's a physiology to it, but it's very much a human process. So the first video is about why. What are the reasons people use? And not everyone is at risk. I mean, some people have more compelling reasons than others. For example, right now I'm working in rural Ohio, and I'm always kind of impressed by how people, the patients will just say right out, I can't cope. I could not cope. Drugs help me cope. Drugs help me with my anxiety. And in the short term, drugs do help people cope, but then things often spiral out of control unless the person pulls back, which many people do. They pull back from addiction. But the people we see as clinicians and the people who make the news, and heaven forbid, the people who overdose, are those who couldn't pull back.
Well,
a big problem.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but just since you're talking about rural Ohio and coping, the other thing it seems is hoping, and the stories surrounding the actual decline in life expectancy among certain age and racial profiles, and the connection to the opioid crisis. That's been much talked about. What's your experience on that aspect? With that aspect?
Oh, very much. I mean, I guess you could file that under the deaths of despair category. I think that's very real. But I tend to think of the causal picture in two ways, and it's not that black and white, but one is the kind of picture you see with folks who live in desperate places where they don't see job opportunities, where they really don't see much of a future for themselves. And there is that sense of, as J.D. Vance put it in his book, places that are hemorrhaging jobs and hopelessness, and also there's often crippling boredom. A lot of the teens are susceptible to that. So when you don't see much of a horizon and the drugs are there, that's a very dangerous prescription. And then you have what you might call almost the Anthony Bourdain model. I mean, people who appear to have everything in life, but why are they turning to drugs? And that's a more there the environment isn't so much to blame, but there are a lot of internal troubles that people are somehow trying to deal with. And at the time, this is the best way they can figure it out. So there are two, I think of it in terms of two levels, but both of them come back to the same phenomena, which is that people are using for reasons. This is not something, again, it's not infectious disease. You don't become addicted because you've been exposed to these medications. Medications in the case of painkillers. And of course, now we've moved on to heroin and fentanyl is causing.
But couldn't they be starter drugs? I mean, the people that I know that are addicted to opioids started because one had a broken bone and was given a prescription by his doctor, and then he became addicted to it. Is that?
Well, it's a touchy topic, but I have read the literature very extensively, and what you tend to see in cases like that is, and your friend may be the exception. Certainly, he may be one of the rare folks, but usually you find that someone like that who's taken pills and then it's spun out of control, or been given pills by their doctor, usually have a history of addiction to drugs or alcoholism, or they're going through a very difficult period in their life, or they have concurrent depression or anxiety, or one classic example could be, let's say, someone who had no problems, life is going well, but they're in a horrific car accident, and of course they were put on painkillers, but they have post-traumatic stress disorder from that car accident. It was so terrifying. What would make the opioids attractive to that person, what might compel them to keep using it, is even after the physical pain is gone, is that mental pain of the trauma of the accident continues to linger. I mean, that's one scenario. But we know, again, just sticking with the painkillers here, that the majority of abused painkillers were not abused by people for whom they were prescribed. They were abused by people who, abused drugs. However, it is also true that doctors were far too generous in their prescribing, and there's been heroic efforts to cut back on that. And to some extent, that's indicated. Doctors would give too much medication. Most people don't even finish the pills doctors give them, but they do put them in the cabinet, and eventually these pills find their way into the community where they can be diverted. And so doctors have been cutting back since 2011, and in fact, for some patients, the restriction on prescribing opioids is actually, the pendulum's gone a little too far to the other side, and that's actually our third video, which is about the chronic pain patients. These are folks who have excruciating conditions. Imagine your worst headache, multiply it by 100, and have it every day of your life. And because of opioids, they can at least get out of bed and at most go to a job. And doctors have become so nervous that they will run afoul of the Drug Enforcement Agency or the state medical board that they have been telling these people, I have to taper you off these medications, or I have to discontinue altogether. And that's been, a disastrous unintended consequence.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just every patient presents a little bit differently. But I wonder, just the way that you were talking about opioid addiction, I wonder if we've also gone too far the other way culturally, where you want to treat addiction and sort of root causes of why people turn to drugs, alcohol, including opioids. But we've gone too far to say, well, you're not responsible. It's a disease that you caught, as you're saying, as you suggested, and it's not a disease you caught. It's choices you made, destructive choices in some cases, and there are reasons for those choices. But you can't just
Yeah.
absolve the person of agency. You have to
Mhm.
own the choices you made, and then make different choices to bring your way back.
Yeah, those are choices made in desperation, so we have sympathy for that. And if a person committed a petty crime in the service of their addiction, but for being a heroin addict or a cocaine addict, they wouldn't have shoplifted. Then we have drug courts and other diversion programs, which I think are so important, such important developments. And the first drug court was in 1989, and where people don't go to jail, they go to a treatment program, but there are requirements, and they leverage the authority of the court, and the retention rates in those programs are longer because there are consequences for dropping out. And if you're addicted to opioids, we have medication. We can't say that for cocaine. There's no medications for stimulants, and that's worrisome because now methamphetamine is coming up very, very vigorously behind opioids. There's no medication treatment for stimulants. And the medication treatment for opioids are excellent because they stabilize people. They help you stand still, which is what you have to do. You have to stand still before you can work on yourself. And they do that by suppressing the withdrawal symptoms and also by suppressing craving. So that's essential. Problem is we have pretty high dropout rates from treatment anyway, so that even if people are, we have those symptoms taken care of, it's people are very ambivalent about giving up the drugs, and that goes back to the reasons. What were they doing for them? And there's that fragile space in between, giving up the drugs but having nothing to replace it in your life, and that's what good treatment does. Also, that's what a lot of people figure out on their own. But we don't hear about those folks, and the treatment system isn't interested in them, and why should they be? That's not who needs them. But there are a lot of people, arguably the majority, who ultimately do figure out how to stop using and stop drinking. Now with fentanyl, that's a very dangerous proposition because you can't just say, oh, well, he'll stop it.
Right.
Actuarially, this person will stop at some point. No, he could die from fentanyl tomorrow or be exposed to HIV, hepatitis C. So you don't want to wait. But I'm just telling you as a matter of epidemiology.
Right.
That most people actually do stop on their own.
What's the parents' role in all of this?
The parents' role is to be vigilant when it comes to painkillers. If you are given them, and I think I worry that we're maybe scaring people off these medications, but on the other hand, a lot of people don't need them. Tylenol with extra strength Excedrin can be really good. So a lot of times you don't even need them, so you just refuse them when the doctor offers. Keep them, you really should keep them under some wraps, and because you don't want your kid's friend coming in, for example, and going to the bathroom and taking. That's very common. So, I mean, that's a superficial but potentially helpful thing to do. Parents just have to watch their kids for the classic changes in behavior. Are the kids more withdrawn? Are they absent without, are they gone for hours and overnight without good explanations? Is money missing? Do they look different? Are they starting to lose weight? Do they see track marks? Now that's obviously a very advanced situation if someone has gone to injecting. But spend time with your kids, as much time as you can.
She is Dr. Sally Satel. She's a practicing psychiatrist and also a lecturer at the Yale University School of Medicine. She's the author of the book Brainwashed: The Seductive Appeal of Mindless Neuroscience, and this new docuseries at the American